One of the hardest things in life is when you have a problem. Okay, you have a problem and you know there's something wrong, but you can't put a label on it. So you can't find the answer. So this on like when you're, searching on Google is when you don't have the keywords. You don't even know what to call it. All you know is that there's something that is very miserable and you're making you unhappy and there's something difficult and you can't even search for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, have you ever had that where you're just kind of like, I don't, and then what often happens is like at some point you're talking to people, you're looking, you're asking things, you're seeing online, and then eventually something clicks and someone tells you, oh, that's this disease or that's this situation or, search this law or whatever it is, use this keyword and you'll find, or this guy here, he did research in that or whatever. And they give you some kind of a clue that essentially once they hand you that clue, it's very easy to get to the next level in life, right? Because then now you know what it's called. So now you can research, right? And then all of a sudden everything becomes clear. Of course, you got to put in the research and, use the energy and time, discipline, but you're basically 90% of the way there. So how do you go from, because I think most of the big problems in life that you have that are going to be your kind of problems are those things where you don't realize there's a problem. And that's even worse than not being able to label it. Like you're unaware there's something going on. So a lot of the things in our lives where we are unaware of our weaknesses. So we're unaware of our personality defects. We're unaware of the things that we can't see. Right? We're unaware of the dangers that lurk. Right? And we could be unaware of the opportunities. So how do you go from, being unaware to being aware? I don't ever hear anybody talk about this because I think this is where a lot of the juice comes in life. Because if you know what it is, of course you have a chance. If you're an honest person, if you're a disciplined person, you have a chance to solve it. But I think it's like in the old, commercials, the hard to get spots, the hard to clean spots. Those are the things where you don't even realize something's going on. You don't even have a clue, and then maybe decades later, you can see something in a new perspective. So how can you more quickly analyze or become aware and put a label on and solve things that you don't realize? It's kind of like, almost like if it was like, we got like omission, right? The sin of omission, right? So when you don't do something, right? When you're not aware of something, when you have no, it's like Helen Keller said. Helen Keller was somebody who could not speak, right? And she could not hear. She was deaf and dumb. And then somebody wrote in her hand the word water. And then they put water in her hand. And that was the very first word that she ever knew. And her story is actually quite interesting, Helen Keller. And I can't remember the exact words, but basically she said that she was an animal, basically, until that point. And the language, so labeling things, awareness of things, that's what turned her from a beast into a human being. And that first word, once she realized that words exist, she didn't even know there was language. She could not speak or hear. Imagine that. So she really was she was living a life close to an animal. And she describes it, and it's very beautiful, actually, the story. It's really wonderful, and it tells us a lot about ourselves. I think what it tells us is that there's so many things we learn from that, right? It's very inspiring, but also I think for myself, what I'm trying to do in this episode is I want to somehow try to delve into and give somewhat of a clue of how to discover something that you don't know exists, whether it's an opportunity or a problem. And I've never heard anybody describe this before. I've never ever heard anybody talk about this. Never read a book on this. I've never heard a podcast. I've never read anything. It's just something that I think I'm good at. I think I'm pretty good at this one. And I want to do it. I know that's quite, the big statement, but I think I would say in the 50% above or below, I'm definitely above the 50 on this one. So how do you discover? So I hope that something I learned, I think it came from traveling. I think it came from my unusual background. When you travel, when you go to new countries, the interesting thing is sometimes you come across something that you didn't know exists. And what's interesting about that is sometimes you can come across something that you didn't know exists, and then you can meet somebody who lives in that country for 10, 20 years, and they don't realize it exists. So just because you found it out doesn't mean that other people see it, even people in the culture. Okay? We're talking about a search for reality, a search for truth, a search for what is there. It's almost like an explorer of the world, like a Christopher Columbus of what isn't seen yet in your life, right? I want you to be able to, if you can even see, start to learn something that you could not see before, whether it's a weakness in yourself, a way to look at life, an opportunity, a vision of how other people see you or your culture that you didn't realize exists before. It gives you enormous power because now you understand. So if people look at you a certain way, just simply knowing that is very valuable. So I just want to use an example of something I learned in Japan. And I hope that this can this story, it's interesting, but the other thing is that I want to hopefully get you thinking almost like leaven in the bread, yeast in the bread, where I'm putting a little bit of yeast in and the whole bread is rising, where you're seeing something that I learned and couldn't see and then learned to see. And this will give you, I don't even want to say what it's going to give you because by saying so, I'm going to limit what it could be. So I wanted to give you something. So when I got to Japan, I remember first got to Japan, I was teaching English and I taught in all kinds of schools. I taught in everything from, I was a freelancer basically. So I worked in all kinds of places. And this was the best thing for me because I got to meet all kinds of people, everything from people in their 80s to kindergarten. So I had kindergarten twice a week. I had adults. I had every single age of Japanese that I was interacting with, like on a deep level, because at that time in Japanese English schools, they didn't really care about any kind of grammar or anything like that, or writing or anything. The only thing they wanted to do was they wanted to talk to you. They were called conversation schools, and that was the whole kind of perspective. And what that meant was they were able to, and I didn't appreciate this at the time, but they were able to talk to a foreigner about something. It wasn't just the language. That wasn't the real reason why they went to these things. It was because in Japanese, you couldn't talk about some things. But in English, they felt like they could talk about it. And so a lot of the things that were said in conversation schools back in like 80s and 90s were kind of mind-boggling. Like they were things that you didn't hear in Japanese. You didn't talk about. They were not allowed to be discussed. And you were as a Japanese person, you felt like, and this is what my perspective is, they felt like they had permission to talk about stuff because in English you could talk about it. It was okay because it wasn't kind of Japan in a way. There's a lot of examples of this in Asia. A lot of examples. Like the best example was like, this is totally different, but I think you'll find this interesting too. Korean Airlines used to crash all the time. It was it had the most crashes of any airline. And the FAA was very concerned about this, and they sent a team to go study Korea to find out why there's so many accidents. And they were surprised to find out that the airlines were not only well maintained, they were better maintained than American Airlines. Like this is where their first impression was, oh, there must be some mechanical problem. And they found out, nope, the mechanics did a great job. If anything, they were better than the international standard. Okay, next thing they went to pilot training. They figured, well, that must be some problem there. Pilot training was top notch. They couldn't figure it out. So finally they started to listen to the black boxes of the accidents in Korea. And what they found was very interesting and relevant. They found that, so for example, an airline would be flying into a mountain, okay, in the direction of a mountain. And the pilot would he would be unaware, okay. But the reason why you have a co-pilot back then was the two heads are better than one, right? So the co-pilot would say something like to the pilot, like, are you sure everything's okay? And the pilot's like, yes, everything's okay. And then the co-pilot would say again, are you confident? Like everything feels comfortable? And, and the pilot say, yep, everything's fine. And then into the mountain. And they realized that the co-pilots were not able, this is what they finally figured out, is they were not able to tell their bosses they were wrong. And so, of course, the effect was devastating, right? And so the FAA said, wait, how can we change this? Like, this is insane. And then they said, Koreans were like, no, you can't change that. That's the way it is in Asia. You can't tell your boss he's wrong. He's older than you. He's more experienced. He's training you. And so the FAA came up with something actually, which was very unique and creative and effective, which is, to me, it's kind of unusual for an American group to do this. In my perspective, this was like very clever, actually. I don't know who thought of this, but anyway, it might have been some local who thought of it. But anyway, it was brilliant. What they did was they realized that in Korean culture, you could not tell the guy he's wrong. And so planes were going to keep crashing, despite the fact that, because the mistake the pilot was making was something that other pilots made. But there would be the co-pilot, and he would say, oh, no, we're going into the mountain. And the guy's like, oh, shoot, sorry about that, thank you. And then that was common. There was like errors, in the old days. There was no computer. You had humans flying aircraft. And, air flight is not that old, So back then it was pretty crude compared to today. It was a completely different era, right? And so people were often making mistakes, and then they would correct each other. Like, oh, we're going the wrong way, go this way. I remember when the Apollo 13 landed on the moon, 69, when they went back and they said, well, how many times did it correct course? It was over 100,000 times. So that was common in flight back then. So no diss to the pilot. But the problem was that there was no way to correct the error because the co-pilot could not do it, right? You get the point. So anyway, what they said was, okay, here's the deal. Because at that time even, in all aircraft, it was by, and it still is today, by law, all pilots have to speak English when they're flying. So all the international pilots, all the pilots basically, have to speak English. And so that everybody can communicate globally, right? And so they said, okay. They said to the pilots, okay, look, in the air, you're speaking English, right? And they said, oh yeah, we speak English. They said, okay, now here's the deal. Is in the air, you're in America. And in America, you can tell the boss, to fuck off. You can tell him he's wrong. You can tell him his suit is ugly. You can tell him whatever the fuck you want to tell him. In the air, right? You're in America. And in America, it's totally cool in fact, it's appreciated. They kind of exaggerate, I heard, that you tell the boss he's wrong, And so they trained the pilots with this new thing in mind. Crashes in Korea went to way below the average ever since that time, that training. It was because they gave them a new perspective. So until you saw the way that they saw the world and the limitations they had, there was no way to correct the error, right? It reminds me of this friend of mine, another story, similar type of thing. All these might help you to see yourself. I hope so. Okay, so my friend was running a golf, what is it called? It was like a resort near the American school in Shanghai. The original American school, the big one, out in, I forgot the name of the area, but way the hell out there. And so he had this maids that were cleaning the bathrooms at the golf course. There's like a very high-end golf course near the American school. And so the maid was not doing a good job. And so he came into the bathroom and he said, "Hey, the place isn't clean." And then the woman was like, basically, "I'll try harder." So he left, and then it was the same. He couldn't figure out what it was. He couldn't figure out what it was because she was a nice person. She was hardworking. She was very attentive. She wasn't like passive aggressive. There were, you couldn't see anything there. So finally, he said, like, in the bathroom, he said, "What do you see when you see the bathroom? What do you see in here?" And she said, "Oh," she said, "this is cleaner than my kitchen," because this was in the 80s, and she lived in a very poor neighborhood with a dirt floor, and they had like a bedpan kind of thing where you basically piss in a thing and you take it outside every day. And there was back then, even until let's see, when was it? Probably until 2005, even in downtown Shanghai, there was 2008 maybe. There were still a lot of apartments like this who didn't have sewage because they were near my house. And I remember we would go by and I realized, what are those garbage cans? "Oh, those aren't garbage cans." And I was like, "Oh, that's what they're doing." And so anyway, so he said to her, "What do you see?" And she said, "Well, it's cleaner than my kitchen." So she could not see the dirt. He said, "Well, can you see any dirt here?" And she said, "No, this is like perfectly clean." And so then the guy did something very clever. So instead of getting angry or looking down on her, he looked down and he saw like a piece of dirt, some kind of dirt, and like whatever it was. And he picked it up and he said, "Well, do you see this?" And she said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Well, would it be cleaner if this wasn't here? Or is it better to leave it there?" And she was like, "Oh, no, it would be cleaner if that wasn't there." And then she totally got it. And she started to pick up all the things that were on the ground. Until that point, she could not see why you'd have a toilet nicer than her kitchen. It just didn't make sense to her. She could not literally see the dirt until he just said, he didn't say this is dirt. He just said, "Would it be cleaner if this wasn't here?" Right? And he worded it in a way that he got her mind to realize what she didn't know. And so she became a very good employee. And she had a good job at one of the best places to work, really, in Shanghai at the time. This was a really great place to work. You met a lot of famous people, a lot of money. I think this woman ended up getting married and owning a bunch of houses. I'm 90% sure it's the same woman. She was a very good person. She just needed a kind of change of perspective because she was on the verge of getting fired. And at the time, there was like no other jobs. So, like the guy that I knew, he didn't want to fire her because he knew, life was going to be tough for her. And he wanted to help her, but she needed to kind of realize something, right? So back to the Japanese. So I got to Japan and I was talking to people, and people would be telling me about their perspective on many things. And I would tell them my perspective. And there was this stubborn thing that I couldn't quite understand. I just could not understand many things about Japan. But there was something going on with swords in Japan. There was something very of course you have metal and all that. And the actual, making of a sword and, there's all that. But that's not what I'm talking about. There was something else. Okay. so back then there was a lot of cowboy movies, right? A lot of cowboy TV and stuff. And then you had Indians, right? And then you had Japanese with swords who didn't have guns. And guns came to Japan with Commodore Perry when he took Shimoda and made that his place, right? I had a summer house in Shimoda, so I know the place very, very well. Very beautiful city. Probably my favorite place in Japan, Shimoda. It's about a 3-hour drive on the tip of the Izu Peninsula in Japan. And really wonderful place. I'd love to retire there. I love Shimoda. But anyway, so they signed the Treaty of Shimoda, and it was a big deal. And they even today still have the Black Ships, event where they have like a what is it called? Like a model, and it comes into the thing. And nowadays it's like impossible to understand how. I mean, it's like a joke, like that this ship like was so poorly armed, but it could somehow the whole nation basically gave up. And a lot of it was because I think the Japanese, they did not want, nobody understood that. Why did the Japanese give up with one ship or a couple ships in one harbor? And to understand that, you have to understand the Japanese perspective about these things. And this is the interesting thing. So the Japanese perspective is they believe that essentially at the heart of it, I know people are going to disagree with me, but fuck that. This is true. The truth is they believe in honor. Okay, whether Japanese today know this or not, this is the truth. Japanese believe in honor. And one of the things about honor is that you essentially do things a certain way in certain circumstances. Okay, so when a man is fighting, he should have bravery. Okay, he should have skills. Okay, it's kind of the difference between a drone operator and a guy in Vietnam. In Vietnam, you had to go out on patrol, you had to put your life at risk every day. And you were fighting hand to hand, essentially, a lot of times. And a different kind of man, even by the Western perspective, like who would you want to go out with in a dangerous situation? A drone operator or a guy who did patrols for years in Vietnam? Which guy? Which guy would you see as more knowledgeable, more wise, which guy would you see as more stable, as more of a man? Which would you see as more of a man? Which guy would you think might have learned the lessons of war? Whatever those may be. The lessons that it's stupid, or the lessons that, whatever the true lessons of war, whatever they are to be learned, who would have learned that better? And if you look at drone operators have a very high rate of mental illness. And I think there's something to the Japanese way of thinking. So the Japanese way of thinking is like this. It's better to stand up and be shot and killed with your sword in your hand, ready to fight, than to be the guy shooting. It's just better. And you're standing up for something real. You're standing up for something right. And in a sense, they were standing up for the Japanese way. And they saw the Western way was coming. They knew. Japanese are very clever. They know what the fuck is going on. And they knew the Japanese way was going to win. They knew it was going to take over. But they were going to stand up and say, and these are the best men of Japan, like really, they were going to say, I'm going to die in order to show that this isn't right. That Japan should not go down this road, even though I know, sadly, that Japan will go down this road. So it's almost like they're not standing up for Japan even, because by dying, by a great warrior dying, a great man dying. They're hastening the death of Japan, right? But they were saying for the principles that Japan believed in. And I think the principles that Japan believed in are proven true by my example of the drone operator. There's something to be said for challenging yourself. There's something to be said for having the guts, for having the training to be able to go into a situation as a man, risking yourself. And there's something that you learn that you do not learn by pressing a button or by being far away. And that's what they see. That's what the Japanese see guns as. They see it as the coward's way. You stand far away and you have no risk to yourself because the guy has a sword. And you're shooting a much better man than yourself. It's very cowardly. And I think, we feel this as people. I think that whenever we talk about a culture, what you're really talking about is a truth or a falsity. So ask yourself, is this Japanese or is this human? Right? Are the Japanese onto something? I'm not saying that you should sacrifice yourself for an ideal. Not at all. Okay, all I'm saying is that's what they did. And they believed in that ideal. And that ideal now, today, even today, we know there's truth to this. There's something different about an executive that worked his way up from the bottom and earned his way. He was a cashier, and then he was a parking lot, and then he was this, and he worked his way up, and he ground it up, and now he's the CEO. And people respect that guy because they know that he knows the whole business. And he knows. And he can make, naturally very wise decisions about how to manage large amounts of people because he kind of knows the mindset of each person and people trust him because of that. It's the same exact reason, to tie in these ideas together, is why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won the Super Bowl yesterday. Was because a lot of people trusted Tom Brady. The guys, the defensive line, the offensive line, the defensive coordinator and the offensive coordinator, everybody believed, whether it's true or not, they believed Tom Brady was going to come through. And in the end, if they had their shit together, he was going to get the ball in their hands. So they said, we're going to do the impossible. We're going to come back and we're going to create a world-class team. And we're going to grind out every fucking yard, every inch in order to make the way so that pocket of opportunity, that moment in time is available for this guy that we believe in because he came up the hard way. Tom Brady, everybody agrees that guy worked his ass off. And he's one of the hardest working guys off the field, on the field. This guy's not some famous guy's son. He's not some rich guy who bought his way in. This guy earned it. No doubt about it. And because of that, they said, we're going to do the impossible to leave that microsecond of opportunity, the window open, and we're going to trust that the guy that we believe in is going to get that fucking ball to the fucking guy at that fucking moment. And it's all going to be worth the sacrifice, right? It's exactly the same as battle. Exactly. That's why we love sports, because it's exactly the same as battle. It's something that men have been doing, societies have been doing for ever since we were animals. And we understand what that is, and we enjoy that. Now, today, it's a very different world, and these things don't fit into our life. So sometimes sports is a way for us to grind through those ideas and those truths that men learned in history. Women did not learn these lessons. Men learned these lessons. And men only learn these lessons. Because men were the ones that always fought. Men carry today the tradition of the wisdom of battle. And there's a very good reason for that. Because men were the only ones who went to battle. Even today, in 2021, in the history of the United States, I'm sure other countries are similar, only less than 1% of U.S. war deaths are female in history. If you count all the war deaths, less than 1%. So there can be no question. Men went to war. Sons were sacrificed. We lost great men all through history in war. And there's always something that comes out of it. And what came out of it was a knowledge and an understanding of some kind of sense of valor, I will leave it up to you to make a decision what came out of that. The wisdom that comes from battle, that comes from defeat, that comes from the incredible waste that is war. The lesson that life is worth living. The lesson that you need to enjoy every fucking breath. The lesson that you need to see what you cannot see. Because the key is, in battle, the number one thing that gets you is what I'm talking about today. It's what you can't see. So it's what you might say, oh, I'm going to win this battle. I got stronger this, stronger that. And then the battle starts. And then as soon as the first shot's fired, everything changes, right? So everything you thought was true becomes not true. So the soldier, and the wise man, whether it's the football player or the wise man listening to this right now, has the unsettling feeling that he knows there's a lot he doesn't know. And he knows that is the very thing that is the most dangerous thing for him, right? So the journey or the struggle and the effort to find more of those things that you cannot see is part of what I'm doing here. I want to help you. And I also for myself, I also know that I cannot see many things, even today. There are many things I cannot see. I don't need any examples. I know, because they're always unfolding for me. There's so many things in life. And those things, as life unfolds, I could even make a case that this is what life is. It's all those fucking things. See, you think you traveled because you went to one place, took a picture, right? That's not traveling. And the same with life. You can live your whole life without learning what is life, right? My desire, and really what I want to pass on, is the knowledge that life is a rich woven blanket of things that are there right in front of you. You don't need a TV show. You don't need entertainment. Life is way more interesting than fiction. Way more interesting. Your life itself, biological life, politics, power, like I said, battle, and all these things, and discovery, and rejuvenation, and learning the lessons of life, and cleaning the slate, all these massive, huge things in life, right? I want to be on this journey where until my last breath, I'm learning more about life and about myself. there's always more to learn. And I always want to be there for that lesson. So I hope this has been useful. I know this is, for some people, is going to be like, whoa, what's he talking about? Maybe think about this one. I hope you can start to see more as you listen to my voice, as you hear the examples, and then look about your life. What is it in your life that you cannot see yet? Think back to the things that you could not see before and think of that process that you had and the danger that you were in when you didn't know of the danger that you were in, right? And then now you understand. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it's good not to know. Sometimes it is good not to know because you just attack something, right? And you just win, right? So for young men, I'm not talking about being careful or not going into the battle of life. Because the more you know, okay, you know a little bit, and you might say, oh, I want to be safe. But if you know deeper, if you know what you are as a man and what you need, then even more, you want to go into battle. You want to battle life. You don't want to be the drone operator of life. You want to be the guy on patrol, the guy who's there, the guy whose eyes are open, putting himself on the line, testing his mind, testing his emotions, testing his bodies, making mistakes, fixing those mistakes, moving on, having cowardice, overcoming cowardice, having wisdom, achieving amazing things. And then waking up the next day and realizing it means nothing. And moving and realizing that there's nothing from yesterday. There's nothing left. All there is today. And you're saying, okay, what today? What today? And I'll end on that. Thanks for listening, guys.